Hello, great to see you again. Will at it with another video, another thought, another question. Really interested to explore this one with you guys today. So, I do indeed have a question. And the question I'm going to throw out here is emotion versus logic. What should we listen to? I think this is a really interesting question because I think about this a lot when I think about longer term decisions versus short term decisions, what I logically understand versus what emotionally I understand. For me, these are different things. I feel that my emotions are important signals. So I'm going to start with the emotion angle. We're going to argue the emotional angle here first. Emotions are important signals in the body. I think they go, hey, something's going well, something's not going well. There's improvements we could make here. I feel happy about this because it's going well. I feel sad about this because it's not going well or something, there's a disconnect. These feelings are important data points to grab onto and graft to the broader idea of where we're at and what we're doing. If we're consistently in a trend sad, or if we're consistently in a trend content, that's really important to listen to. But I guess kind of blips of emotion in the moment, I guess I'm hesitant with engaging in more and kind of trying to create a bit of an awareness for myself, kind of go, I'm feeling this strong feeling. What is this? What is going on, right? And I'm listening to that, but I'm not using that to act necessarily always in the moment, but it's definitely always affecting me. I guess a hypothesis I certainly have for what emotions are, where emotions are at, how they affect how we process the world, is that they fundamentally affect every part of how we process things. They're the earliest part in the sequence, right? We have some kind of feeling, and then we try and understand that with words, understand that with how we rationalize things, and that ultimately builds the scaffolding for what we consider our logic, in my opinion. Because I think that, there are concrete data points we can point to say this is my hand, this is a human hand right here on the screen, human hands, right? A concrete thing. But how I connect the utility of these hands, or the data points between these concrete things that exist, is fundamentally affected by my emotion, right? How I feel about these objects and the relationship to them, because I'll have certain emotional preferences, I'll have certain beliefs, certain biases that will make me pull together certain conclusions that would be different from someone else and their unique experience. So when we think about the logic side, in theory, it's easy to go, 1 + 1 = 2. Logic is absolute. There's an objectivity there. I struggle to be okay with the word objective personally, because the more I learn about the brain from my point of view and from what I see of a lot of other people, a lot of what I do is very emotion focused. I see emotions and signals coming in subconsciously and subliminally, and facial expressions, how we express ourselves, how I'm talking right now, how I'm feeling, right? That has undercurrents of emotion for sure that are fueling how I'm even piecing all of this together. And that's normal. That's fine, I think. But the logic of how I string things together is not going to be logically the same as everyone else, right? There are people always debating all over the place, right? Having these philosophical debates, moral debates, ethical debates, and I found myself in one recently, and it's had me thinking about a lot of this kind of stuff. And the more I look at my own logic, the more I think, I connected those dots because I felt this way, because I have a bias in this direction, because I prefer this over this, and that's an emotional thing. That's not a logical thing. For instance, when I think about kind of my own political preferences, my political leanings, right? My personal logic is that we should redistribute resources, tax wealth, not work. I'm very pro Gary Stevenson, for example. who's seen as kind of left wing. I'd say I have kind of more left wing political preferences, right? But those are definitely fueled by emotion. I would also say on the right wing, I feel people who talk about a lot of right wing ideas, it's certainly fueled by emotion too. And like, that's fine. I don't think they're any less for that. I think we're both humans and our logic is being fueled in different ways, right? We have different values that fuel our emotions, which fuel our logic. So if I feel really strongly that everyone should have like equal access to like medical care, like universal healthcare should be a thing. I love the NHS in the UK. I think that's awesome. And I think, unfortunately, some places like the US don't have something like that, and I wish they did, because I think it's fundamentally a public good. Different people might disagree with that because they have different values to me, you know, and they might think it's logical and common sense to pay for healthcare at the costs that pharmaceutical companies set, and insurance medical providers set. And like, that's intuitive and that's logical and that makes sense in their frame of reference from their point of view. Now, I, as somebody who's really interested in any point of view, would say that I can kind of empathize with how they got there, maybe on like the values they were brought up with. Maybe they like really value like libertarianism, which is like the belief that they really believe in like individual liberty, individual freedom, individual choice, that you should take care of yourself, you should have a small government, big businesses, and that informs how they feel about like having a nationalized health service. I would argue because they probably care about freedom, right? They care about being self-sufficient. And those like aren't bad values, but it certainly adds a bias to how you process the logic. You know, though that isn't my personal logic. I think that there should be a wealth redistribution. I think that there should be a trickle down from the top. The trickle down economics hasn't really worked in my experience, my lifetime, I feel. But I think that we should be taxing people with assets a lot more. And if they run away, we have concrete assets. We have buildings with properties. We'll just take the properties back. That's fine. I'm cool with that. Right? And that's like funded on my like emotional belief that I think housing should be like more affordable. More people should be able to afford the fundamental basics. Thinking Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. The basics need to be covered for us to even have a chance of producing more innovation, more productivity in the economy. If you care about that, like I care more about people just being good and healthy and happy and secure, and I think that comes with more creative innovation. I feel like that's certainly been a big part of decades gone by, where housing has been more affordable, living's been more affordable. Which has given people more breathing room to be more creative, be more relaxed. But again, this is all fueled by my emotional bias, right? This is all like, you know, in a way I'm like presenting this logically, but like there's emotion underneath that. And that's strung together by my values. And I'm not going to tell anyone what their values should be. You know, there are things I'm going to disagree with and say that sucks and I don't think that's right, but like that's their values. And I really feel, to kind of tie these together towards the end here, that we should listen to the emotional signals, be aware of the bias and the logic, and then tie it around to a bigger, broader value for ourselves. Because I think like logic in isolation doesn't mean anything, right? If we like look at numbers on a screen, back when computers were like just literally numbers on a screen, and they were just like these old like CRT like PCs back in the day, probably show my age a little here, but you know, in the 90s, there was like less graphics on the screen. It was like very bland and plain, and that had like, for a lot of people, I think a lot less emotive connectivity. People connected to it less emotionally. But these days we have all of these like beautiful interfaces. I'm thinking Apple specifically, right? They were really great creating really engaging user interfaces. That's because it's like more emotively provocative, and that's why I think people more than ever connect to this stuff. So as a little summary, I think We need to use the gradients that come out of our emotional responses to inform what our values are, and then understand that when we use logic, we have a bias there. So like, fundamentally, my answer is like, we should kind of listen to all of it, because I think it'll really inform what will feel kind of more real to all of us. I think it certainly felt a lot more real for me to follow along that train of thought instead of kind of take somebody else's absolute logic that sounds like cool and impressive and powerful and try and siphon a bit of that power for myself. That's something I feel. But hey, that's my take. I'm going to leave it there. It's been wonderful to share these ideas with you. Thank you for listening. I've been Will. You've been pretty cool, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.